The sun had barely risen over Austin, Texas, but Emily was already awake, not because she had an early meeting or a creative spark she couldn't ignore, but because she couldn't sleep. Her heart raced as she stared at the ceiling, replaying the same haunting question over and over again. Why can't I just start? Emily, a 28-year-old graphic designer with an enviable portfolio, was anything but lazy. Her work had been featured in national campaigns, and her professors in college had called her a visionary. But lately, she felt like a fraud. Her talent, once her greatest source of pride, now felt like a weight pulling her down. Every time she thought about opening her laptop to start a new project, her chest tightened and her mind spun with worst-case scenarios. "It's like I'm running out of time, but I can't move," she told her best friend Rachel over coffee one morning. Rachel, ever the practical problem solver, tried to cheer her up. "Emily, you're overthinking. Just start somewhere, anywhere." Emily nodded and forced a smile, but deep down, she felt hopeless. If it were that easy, wouldn't she have done it by now? The truth was, Emily wasn't just procrastinating. She was stuck in a cycle of anxiety-induced avoidance that she couldn't escape. Every time she tried to push through, her mind bombarded her with thoughts like, what if this isn't good enough? What if they hate it? What if I'm not really talented at all? Instead of facing those fears, she'd retreat to the safety of her couch, binge-watching Stranger Things for the third time, or scrolling aimlessly through TikTok for hours. It wasn't relaxing, it was numbing. Her work life wasn't the only thing suffering. Emily's relationships were beginning to feel the strain too. She stopped replying to emails and texts, even from close friends and family. When her mom called to check in, Emily let it go to voicemail, unable to face another well-meaning, "How's work going, sweetie?" It wasn't going, and she didn't know how to explain that without breaking down. On paper, Emily had everything she'd ever wanted, a career she was passionate about, supportive friends, and the freedom to work from home. But inside, she felt like she was falling apart. Every unfinished task added to the mountain of guilt and shame she carried, making it harder and harder to imagine a way out. She'd start fresh tomorrow, she always told herself, but tomorrow came and went, and nothing changed. It was during one of those sleepless early mornings that Emily finally hit her breaking point. She'd been up all night thinking about a project deadline she'd already missed by 2 weeks. The client, a big-name tech company, had given her countless extensions, but Emily hadn't even started the first draft. When she finally checked her inbox, there it was, a polite but firm email terminating their contract. It wasn't just a lost opportunity, it was a blow to her confidence that left her reeling. "I can't do this anymore," Emily whispered to herself as she stared at the email. She felt like a failure, not just professionally but personally. She'd always prided herself on being dependable, someone people could count on. Now she could barely count on herself to get out of bed in the morning. That afternoon, Emily did something she'd been avoiding for months. She searched for a therapist. Scrolling through reviews and profiles, she felt a flicker of hope when she came across a name that seemed different from the rest: Dr. Vincent Vale. His bio didn't just list his qualifications, it spoke to her struggles directly. "Procrastination isn't about laziness," his profile read. "It's about fear. Together, we'll confront what's holding you back and help you move forward." It was as if he were speaking directly to her heart. With a deep breath, Emily clicked the button to schedule her first appointment. For the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of something she thought she'd lost: hope. Dr. Vale wasn't what she expected. When they met for the first time, he greeted her with a calm, steady presence that immediately put her at ease. His office was warm and inviting, filled with books, soft lighting, and a single-framed quote that caught her eye: "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to begin." Sitting across from him, Emily felt a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She'd rehearsed what to say, but now that she was here, the words wouldn't come. Sensing her hesitation, Dr. Vale leaned forward slightly and said, "Take your time. You're in the right place." Those simple words were all it took to make Emily feel safe enough to open up, Slowly but surely, she began to tell her story about her dreams, her fears, and the invisible chains that kept her from moving forward. What she didn't know yet was that this conversation would be the start of her journey to break free from anxiety's grip and rediscover the joy of living. As Emily sat in Dr. Vale's office, the weight of her anxiety felt like a tangible force pressing down on her chest. The words began to spill out, slow at first, then like a rushing river. She told him about her late nights, her missed deadlines, and her growing fear of failure. Every story carried the same theme. No matter how much she wanted to succeed, she couldn't bring herself to take the first step. Her days felt like an endless cycle of avoidance, guilt, and shame. "I just don't understand it," Emily said, her voice trembling. "I've always been driven. In college, I was the person everyone came to for help. Now I can't even help myself." Her eyes filled with tears as she added, "Sometimes I wonder if I'm just broken." Dr. Vale listened intently, nodding thoughtfully. He had seen this pattern before. Anxiety, he explained, has a way of convincing people they're protecting themselves, when in reality they're stuck in a cycle of fear. "Procrastination isn't laziness," he said, his voice calm and steady. "It's your brain's way of keeping you safe from perceived threats. In your case, it's the fear of failure, or maybe even the fear of success." Emily blinked, confused. "The fear of success?" she echoed. The concept seemed absurd. Why would anyone be afraid of succeeding? But as Dr. Vale explained, it began to make sense. "Success comes with its own pressures," he said. "The higher you climb, the further you have to fall. It's easier to stay where you are, even if it's uncomfortable, than to risk stepping into the unknown." That explanation struck a chord with Emily. She thought about her childhood, growing up as the youngest of 3 siblings in a competitive household. Her older brother David was the golden child, straight A's, star athlete, the one who could do no wrong. Her sister Sarah was the rebel, always challenging the rules and carving her own path. Emily, caught in the middle, had learned early on to be the peacemaker, the one who didn't rock the boat. Her role was to be dependable, to avoid mistakes, to be good enough. But somewhere along the way, that need for approval had turned into a fear of imperfection. In college, it had driven her to excel, but now, as an adult, it was holding her back. She told Dr. Vale about the endless hours she spent scrolling through social media, comparing herself to others. "It's like everyone else has it all figured out," she said. "Meanwhile, I can't even reply to an email without overthinking every word." Dr. Vale gently pointed out the fallacy in that thinking. "Social media is a highlight reel," he said. "You're comparing your behind the scenes to someone else's carefully curated moments. And every time you do, you're feeding your anxiety. It's no wonder you feel stuck." Emily nodded, but the shame still lingered. "I know I need to stop," she admitted, "but every time I try to start something, it's like my brain freezes. I just sit there, staring at my computer until I give up and turn on Netflix." Dr. Vale leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "Let's break it down," he said. "What happens in those moments? What are you feeling?" Emily closed her eyes, trying to put it into words. "It's like my chest tightens and my heart races. My mind starts spinning with all the things that could go wrong. What if the client hates it? What if I can't finish on time? What if I'm just not good enough?" "And then," Dr. Vale prompted, "and then I feel paralyzed," she said. "So I avoid it. But then the guilt kicks in and I feel even worse. It's like a never-ending loop." Dr. Vale nodded again. "That loop is your brain's way of avoiding discomfort. It thinks it's protecting you, but in reality, it's keeping you trapped. The first step to breaking free is recognizing that anxiety is a liar. It tells you you're not good enough, but that's not true. The second step is learning how to act in spite of that fear." Emily wanted to believe him, but the idea of acting in the face of her anxiety felt impossible. She admitted as much, and Dr. Vale reassured her. "We're not trying to climb the whole mountain in one day," he said. "We're just taking the first step, and that step is understanding your patterns." Over the next few weeks, they worked together to identify the behaviors that were keeping Emily stuck. She realized that her to-do lists, which she thought were helping her stay organized, were actually overwhelming her. "I put so much on the list that it feels impossible to start," she confessed. "Then I beat myself up for not finishing it." They also uncovered her habit of productive procrastination, cleaning her apartment, reorganizing her closet, or doing anything that made her feel busy without actually tackling the work she needed to do. "It's like I trick myself into thinking I'm being productive," she said, "but deep down, I know I'm avoiding the real task." Dr. Vale helped her see these patterns for what they were: coping mechanisms. "Your brain is trying to keep you safe," he said, "but safety doesn't lead to growth. Growth comes from stepping out of your comfort zone, even when it's uncomfortable." Though Emily still felt uncertain, she was beginning to understand her anxiety in a new way. It wasn't an enemy to be defeated. It was a part of her that needed compassion and guidance. And with Dr. Vale's help, she was starting to believe that breaking free from procrastination was possible. The day Emily met Dr. Vincent Vale marked the beginning of a transformation she never thought possible. She walked into his office with hesitant steps, clutching her bag tightly as though it could shield her from her fears. The office itself was a blend of calm and warmth, a safe haven for those like her, desperate to find clarity amidst the chaos of their minds. Soft lighting bathed the room in a golden glow, while a single bookshelf stretched across one wall, its shelves lined with books about psychology, personal growth, and human resilience. Dr. Vale greeted her with a reassuring smile. His presence was magnetic, not imposing, but calm and confident in a way that immediately put Emily at ease. As they sat down, he leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the armrests of his chair. "Emily," he said, his voice calm yet authoritative, "you've taken an important first step by coming here. That tells me you're ready for change, even if you don't believe it yet." Emily nodded but said nothing. She wasn't sure where to start or how to explain the mess in her head. Her mind felt like a web of tangled thoughts, each one pulling her in a different direction. She took a deep breath and decided to begin with what felt like the biggest failure: her missed deadlines. "I'm a graphic designer," she began. "I used to love what I do, but now it feels heavy. Every time I start a new project, my mind fills with all these what-ifs. What if it's not good enough? What if the client hates it? What if I can't finish it on time? So instead of starting, I just don't. I put it off until it's too late, and then I feel even worse." Dr. Vale listened intently, his expression thoughtful but non-judgmental. "What do you do instead?" he asked. Emily hesitated. It was embarrassing to admit. "I binge-watch Netflix, scroll through social media, or clean my apartment. Anything to distract myself, but it doesn't work. The whole time I'm thinking about everything I should be doing." Dr. Vale nodded. "That's the cycle of avoidance," he explained. "Your anxiety creates a sense of fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of imperfection. To escape that fear, you distract yourself with other tasks, which provides temporary relief. But when the deadline looms closer, the anxiety returns, often stronger than before. It's a self-reinforcing loop." Emily's shoulders slumped. "I know it's a problem," she said, her voice tinged with frustration, "but I don't know how to stop. I've tried everything, making to-do lists, setting reminders, even bribing myself with rewards. Nothing works." Dr. Vale leaned back slightly, his fingers steepled. "Emily, procrastination isn't the real issue here. It's a symptom of something deeper. The key isn't to fight the procrastination itself, but to understand what's driving it. In your case, it sounds like it's perfectionism." Emily blinked. "Perfectionism?" she repeated. "But I don't feel perfect. I feel like I'm failing all the time." "That's the paradox of perfectionism," Dr. Vale explained. "It doesn't mean you think you're perfect. It means you feel an overwhelming pressure to be perfect. And when you don't meet those impossible standards, you freeze. It's easier to do nothing than to risk doing something imperfectly." Emily stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always thought of herself as someone who needed to work harder, to push through her struggles. It had never occurred to her that the real battle was against the standards she had set for herself, standards that were, as Dr. Vale pointed out, impossible to achieve. "So, what do I do?" she asked tentatively. "How do I break this cycle?" Dr. Vale smiled gently. "The first step is to understand that procrastination is your brain's way of trying to protect you. It's misguided, yes, but it's not your enemy. The second step is to redefine success. Instead of aiming for perfection, aim for progress. Start small, so small that it feels almost laughable. The goal isn't to climb the entire mountain in one day, it's just to take the first step." Emily frowned. "That sounds too simple." "It is simple," Dr. Vale said, "but that doesn't mean it's easy. Anxiety will try to pull you back into the cycle. Our work together will focus on building new habits and reframing your thoughts so that over time those fears lose their grip on you." They spent the rest of the session exploring her triggers and discussing strategies for managing her anxiety. Dr. Vale introduced her to the concept of the 5-minute rule. If a task feels overwhelming, commit to doing it for just 5 minutes. "Often the hardest part is starting," he explained. "Once you take that first step, momentum builds." By the end of the session, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Dr. Vale's approach made sense in a way that nothing else had before. For the first time, she saw a path forward, not an easy one, but a path nonetheless. As she left his office, she caught sight of a framed quote on his bookshelf: "You don't have to be perfect, you just have to begin." The words stayed with her as she walked to her car, a quiet reminder that maybe, just maybe, she could break free from the chains of her anxiety. Emily walked into her second session with Dr. Vale, feeling a cautious sense of optimism. For the first time in years, she felt as though her struggles with procrastination and anxiety were no longer insurmountable. There was a glimmer of hope that, with the right tools and support, she could regain control over her life. Still, she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. As they sat down, Dr. Vale asked, "How was your week? Did you have a chance to try the 5-minute rule we talked about?" Emily nodded. "I did," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "It felt ridiculous at first, setting a timer for 5 minutes and telling myself I could stop afterward. But then something surprising happened. Once I started, I didn't want to stop." Dr. Vale leaned forward, intrigued. "What did you work on?" "My portfolio updates," Emily said. "I've been putting it off for months, even though I know it's important for landing new clients. I told myself I'd just organize the files, but before I knew it, I was designing a new layout. It felt good, like I was finally taking control." "That's the power of momentum," Dr. Vale said with a smile. "Often the hardest part of any task is simply starting. Once you take that first step, it becomes easier to keep going." Emily's progress didn't stop there. Over the following weeks, she began implementing other strategies Dr. Vale had introduced. One of the most transformative was breaking her tasks into smaller, manageable steps. Instead of writing "complete client project" on her to-do list, a goal so overwhelming it paralyzed her, she started listing specific actionable items like create color palette or draft first sketch. "I realized I was trying to do everything all at once," Emily explained during one session. "But when I break it down, it doesn't feel so impossible anymore." Dr. Vale nodded. "Anxiety thrives on ambiguity," he said. "When your brain doesn't know where to start, it defaults to avoidance. By creating clear, specific steps, you're giving yourself a roadmap. It's like turning on the headlights on a dark road. You may not see the whole journey, but you can see enough to take the next step." Another breakthrough came when Emily started practicing self-compassion. For years, her inner dialogue had been harsh and unforgiving. Whenever she procrastinated, she berated herself with thoughts like, "You're so lazy, why can't you just get it together?" Dr. Vale helped her reframe those thoughts. "Your anxiety isn't a flaw," he told her. "It's a part of you that's trying to protect you, even if it's doing so in a way that's counterproductive. Instead of fighting it, Try acknowledging it with kindness. Say, "Thank you for trying to keep me safe, but I've got this." At first, Emily felt silly talking to herself in this way, but as she practiced, she noticed a shift. The shame that had weighed her down began to lift, replaced by a sense of understanding and self-acceptance. She started viewing her anxiety not as an enemy, but as a signal, a reminder to check in with herself and take things one step at a time. Her transformation wasn't without setbacks. There were days when the old patterns of avoidance crept back in, and Emily found herself binge-watching Netflix instead of working on her projects. But instead of spiraling into guilt, she remembered Dr. Vale's advice: progress, not perfection. One afternoon, Emily faced her biggest test yet. She had landed a new client, a startup in Silicon Valley that wanted her to design their branding. It was her dream project, but it also triggered her deepest fears. As she sat down to start, the familiar wave of anxiety washed over her. Her chest tightened and her mind filled with doubts. What if I can't deliver? What if they regret hiring me? But this time, she didn't give in to the fear. She set her timer for 5 minutes and told herself, just start. Slowly, she began sketching out ideas. The first drafts weren't perfect, but she kept going. By the end of the day, she had created a concept she felt proud of. When she delivered the final project weeks later, the client was thrilled. Emily couldn't believe it. "I was terrified the whole time," she admitted to Dr. Vale during their next session. "But I didn't let that stop me. And now, for the first time in a long time, I feel capable." Dr. Vale smiled warmly. "That's because you are," he said. "You've shown yourself that fear doesn't have to control you. You can feel it and still move forward. That's real courage." As Emily reflected on her journey, she realized just how far she had come. She no longer saw procrastination as a personal failure, but as a signal to pause, reflect, and take small, deliberate steps. She had learned to embrace imperfection and celebrate progress, no matter how small. Emily's story is a testament to the power of understanding and compassion, Dr. Vale later reflected. Breaking free from anxiety-induced procrastination isn't about eliminating fear. It's about learning to live alongside it, to act in spite of it, and to trust in your own resilience. Emily knew this moment would come eventually. For weeks, she had been making progress, small but meaningful steps toward breaking free from her anxiety-induced procrastination. She had learned to start small, embrace imperfection, and show herself the compassion she had always struggled to extend. But deep down, she had been waiting for the inevitable, a project that would test everything she had learned. And now, it was here. The opportunity arrived in the form of an email from a high-profile tech company in Silicon Valley. They were launching a new product line and wanted Emily to design the branding. It was the kind of project she had dreamed of landing since she first started her career in graphic design. But as she read the email, excitement quickly gave way to panic. Her heart raced as her mind began conjuring up all the ways this could go wrong. What if I can't deliver? What if they hate my work? What if I ruin my reputation? The doubts came fast and furious, a relentless tide of negativity. For a moment, Emily considered turning down the project. She even drafted a reply. "Thank you for considering me, but I'm not available at this time." It felt like the safe thing to do, but as her finger hovered over the send button, she paused. She thought about the progress she had made in her sessions with Dr. Vale, the tools she had worked so hard to develop. She could hear his calm voice in her mind. "Fear will always be there, Emily. The goal isn't to eliminate it. The goal is to act in spite of it." Instead of sending the email, she saved it as a draft and made an appointment to see Dr. Vale. Sitting across from him a few days later, she confessed her fears. "I want to do it," she said, "but I'm so scared I'll fail. What if I'm not good enough?" Dr. Vale regarded her thoughtfully before speaking. "Emily, I want you to consider this. What's the worst that could happen if you fail?" She hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "I guess the client could be disappointed," she said slowly. Maybe they won't hire me again. And if that happens, would it mean you're a failure as a person? Or would it simply mean that this project wasn't the right fit? Emily thought about it. She had always tied her self-worth to her work, but now she was beginning to see the flaw in that logic. It wouldn't mean I'm a failure, she admitted. It would just mean I'm human, Dr. Vale nodded. Exactly. Failure isn't final, it's feedback, and every great designer, writer, or creator has faced it at some point. The difference is they didn't let it stop them. They kept going. Emily left the session feeling a little lighter, but the fear didn't vanish completely. She knew it wouldn't. What mattered was that she had decided to take on the project anyway. She set aside a day to brainstorm and made a plan to tackle the work in small, manageable steps. When the day arrived, Emily sat at her desk, her sketchpad in front of her. Her chest felt tight, and her hands trembled slightly as she picked up her pencil. The anxiety was there, just as she expected. But instead of letting it paralyze her, she took a deep breath and remembered the 5-minute rule. Just start, she told herself. You can stop after 5 minutes if it feels overwhelming. The first few strokes on the page were hesitant and unsure. She cringed at the lines, convinced they weren't good enough. But she kept going, reminding herself that the first draft didn't have to be perfect. It just had to exist. Slowly, the ideas began to flow. She lost track of time as she sketched and erased, adjusting colors and shapes until something beautiful began to emerge. By the end of the day, Emily had a rough concept she felt proud of. It wasn't finished, but it was a start, and that was enough. Over the next 2 weeks, she refined the design, checking in with the client at key milestones. To her surprise, they loved her ideas and provided constructive feedback that helped her improve the final product. When the project was complete, Emily delivered it with a mix of excitement and nervousness. The client's response was everything she had hoped for. They were thrilled with her work and couldn't wait to showcase it at their launch event. For the first time in years, Emily felt the kind of pride and fulfillment that had drawn her to design in the first place. In her next session with Dr. Vale, she shared the news. I was scared the entire time, she admitted, but I did it anyway, and now I feel capable, like I can handle whatever comes next. Dr. Vale smiled. That's because you can. You've shown yourself that fear doesn't have to control you. It's there, but it doesn't define you, and every time you face it, you grow stronger. Emily walked out of that session with her head held high. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, more moments when fear would try to take over. But now, she had the tools to face them, and the confidence to believe in herself. Dr. Vincent Vale sat back in his chair, reflecting on Emily's journey. Her story was a testament to the quiet, often unseen power of transformation. She had walked into his office months ago, weighed down by anxiety and frozen in a cycle of procrastination. But now here she was, a woman who had not only faced her fears but emerged stronger because of them. As he thought about the moments that had defined Emily's progress, one in particular stood out, the day she took on the Silicon Valley branding project. It wasn't the size of the project that mattered most, nor the accolades she had received from the client. What mattered was the internal shift it represented. Emily had learned to act in the face of her anxiety, to break free from the chains of perfectionism, and to embrace progress over perfection. In his years as a psychologist, Dr. Vale had seen many stories like Emily's. Anxiety-induced procrastination was a silent epidemic, affecting people from all walks of life. Its symptoms were often misunderstood, dismissed as laziness or a lack of discipline. But as Emily's journey had shown, procrastination wasn't about laziness at all. It was about fear. Fear is a master of disguise, Dr. Vale often told his patients. It whispers lies in your ear, convincing you that you're not good enough, that failure is inevitable, that the safest choice is to do nothing at all. But the truth is, fear only has as much power as you give it. The moment you take a step forward, even a small one, you begin to take that power back. Emily's story resonated deeply with Dr. Vale, not only because of her growth, but because of what it represented for so many others. As he often reminded his patients, the journey to overcoming procrastination wasn't about eliminating anxiety. Anxiety, like any other emotion, was a natural part of the human experience. The goal wasn't to silence it, but to learn how to live alongside it. Anxiety isn't your enemy, he would say. It's a signal, a reminder that you care about the outcome of something. The key is to acknowledge that signal, thank it for its concern, and then take action anyway. For Emily, taking action had started with the smallest of steps. The 5-minute rule had been a game changer, giving her a way to bypass the overwhelming weight of starting a task. By breaking her work into manageable pieces, she had begun to chip away at the mountain of fear that had once seemed insurmountable. Each small victory built her confidence, creating a ripple effect that extended to other areas of her life. Dr. Vale recalled one of their later sessions when Emily had shared a particularly poignant realization. "For so long," she had said, "I thought procrastination was about avoiding work, but now I see it was really about avoiding feelings, fear, doubt, insecurity. Once I started facing those feelings instead of running from them, everything changed." Her words had stayed with him, a reminder of the profound insights that could emerge when someone was willing to do the hard work of self-reflection. Emily had not only learned to manage her anxiety, but had also developed a deeper understanding of herself, her values, her fears, and her strengths. As he prepared for his next session, Dr. Vale thought about the lessons he hoped others could take from Emily's journey. He often shared these insights during his talks and workshops, knowing how universal her struggles and triumphs were. Start small. Big tasks can feel overwhelming, but progress begins with the smallest step. Whether it's setting a timer for 5 minutes or writing just one sentence, action creates momentum. Embrace imperfection. Perfection is a myth, and chasing it only leads to paralysis. Instead, aim for progress. Done is better than perfect. Reframe failure. Failure isn't a reflection of your worth. It's feedback. Each setback is an opportunity to learn and grow. Practice self-compassion. The way you talk to yourself matters. Replace harsh self-criticism with kindness and understanding. Treat yourself as you would a close friend. Recognize your patterns. Procrastination often stems from deeper emotional triggers. Identifying and addressing those triggers is key to breaking the cycle. For Dr. Vale, stories like Emily's were what made his work meaningful. Each transformation was a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the capacity for change. He hoped that by sharing these stories, he could inspire others to take the first step on their own journeys. As he glanced at the quote on his bookshelf, "You don't have to be perfect, you just have to begin," he smiled. It had been a guiding mantra for Emily, just as it had been for so many others. The power of those simple words lay in their truth. Progress starts with a single step. He looked forward to the day when Emily's story, like so many others, would reach those who needed it most. Because if there was one thing he had learned in his years of practice, it was this: transformation is always possible. It doesn't happen overnight, and it's never without challenges, but it's within reach for anyone willing to take the first step. Emily taught me as much as I taught her, Dr. Vale thought to himself. And that's the beauty of this work. It's a partnership, a journey we take together. With that thought, he turned back to his notes.